Hi and welcome to the Joomla Juice podcast number 1. Today we're interviewing Mitch Pirtle, who's a core dev with Joomla. Mitch will be talking to us today about his time with Mambo. He'll also be touching on a few things, including the upcoming release of Joomla 1.1. Okay, Mitch, welcome to our podcast. And first of all, I'll introduce you to the listeners, as you're a member of the core team for Joomla, formerly with Mambo for quite some time. And I understand you've got an interest with New York PHP user group. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm pretty active there.
What do you do there?
Oh, I harass people on the mailing list mostly. I make presentations, I go to other presentations and pretty much lurk on the mailing lists there. We also have a special interest group for Joomla junkies in the New York City area, which is kind of cool because there's actually quite a few Joomla junkies in the area. But we got people on the list from other areas, not even in the country actually, so it's pretty, I guess it's become a popular list.
Joomla junkies.
Yeah.
Have you met any of these guys?
Yeah, I've met quite a few of them here in the city. The ones that are in New York City, sure.
Yeah.
That's where I live, and that's why I participate in New York PHP, because it's here. It's an easy commute, as opposed to say Zurich PHP or so on.
Yeah.
But I hang out with these people often.
Okay. So, what brought you originally to Mambo, and then, well, we know the Joomla story, but what brought you to using an open source content management system?
Wow. I'd have to say a couple really short stories.
Mm-hmm.
The first one, which was this was way back in the early 90s. I was working I was a plaything of the sales department, and I lived in Seattle for a company that made big Unix boxes. And what we had started doing was we started selling professional services and started making a lot of good money. Big projects, 7-8 figure projects, just doing professional services, and all of these services kind of relied on the big enterprise application environments, business objects and that kind of stuff. And after doing a Lotus Notes deployment to 20,000 desktops, I said, that's it. No more fat client ever again. If it's not this, back then the web was really just black text and a gray background page, and no graphics. And I thought, wow, I'd much rather have that than what I just went through deploying Notes to 20,000 desktops. And so I said, that's it. And actually quit my job and hung up a shingle doing website programming and custom application development, and really focused on open source technologies, because back then that was all that was available. If you wanted to run a website, you needed to use the NCSCA server.
Yeah.
And that was that. So it was pretty much, you had to use open source, whether you were, even recognized it for what it was or not. Then fast forward, I lived in Switzerland for a few years, and when we came back to New York City, I was thinking about going back into content management systems. I'd created one that I was selling commercially, and was going to revive it and bring it, hang out my shingle again, and went to the Linux World here in New York City in early 2004, and as I was walking through the .org pavilion, I saw this booth that had I'm an old Unix programmer, so to me, Asterisk is called Splat, and I saw this big orange Splat hanging on the wall of this desk, and I walked up, I was like, I gotta check this out, what's up with that? And that was the Mambo group, and there was Michelle Bassam, her daughter, Phil Taylor, and Spig, Stephen Pignataro was there, and I talked to everybody there. When they showed me the admin interface, I thought, okay, I'm sunk. There's no way I'm going to bring a commercial product to market that can compete with these guys. And they got an army of people, and they got a whole, army of third-party developers and template people, and then they had their whole ecosystem, right? The whole universe was ready-made. And I thought, there's no way I can compete, and if you can't beat them, join them. And I demanded CVS access on the spot. To which, Phil Taylor was, politely declined and said, "We'll get back to you." I continued to harass him, and I guess it was a month or a month and a half later, and they added me to the core team.
Okay.
And I quite literally, I dropped everything I was doing and just said, "That's it. I'm throwing myself at Mambo full force," because to me it did everything I wanted it to do, and it enabled me on a personal level to achieve things that I wanted to be able to do that I couldn't on my own. And of course, by that time I had fully bought in. I became a Plone guy and a Zope guy, and I got really involved in open source. And so this was a real good opportunity for me to give back to the community. I thought that was perhaps the most influential thing in me making the decision was really it was an opportunity for me to write code and actually give it back and participate, not just be a consumer.
Okay, well, that's great. It sort of positions us as to how you got to that point. And, I understand there's a couple of interesting things about your work history. You work with Apple, is that right?
Yeah. I started in Apple in the engineering group.
Where was that? Was that Seattle too?
No, that was California.
California.
That was California.
Cupertino. Or Cupertino. How do you say that?
It's Cupertino, but I was actually up in Fremont before they moved Fremont to Colorado or Texas or wherever it ended up getting sent to.
And did you ever meet Steve?
Yes, he came to a party outside of one of the buildings. They had, of course they had the Christmas party. Back then the Christmas parties this was in the late 80s, and this was when the Christmas parties were just absolutely insane. They basically rented the entire San Francisco Civic one year. And it was, I can't really describe it without, being in person and pointing and showing and flapping my arms around, because it was just huge. Let's just say that there must have been like 7 or 8 bands all playing at the same time on different stages, and so if there's 7 or 8 bands, there must have been 10 or 14 bars, and I remember food being somewhere, but between the bands and the bars, you didn't really see much of what else was going on. It was pretty big. So it was a really big party.
This was before Steve Jobs was pushed.
Yeah, before he got the boot. Yeah. But I was there when it happened, and it just, the atmosphere really changed. It really did change almost overnight.
Wow.
Apologies for my cat sneezing in the background.
That's okay. This is live. So there's another side to you too, isn't there? Tell us a bit about the musician in you, or are you going to hide that little fact? No. Yeah, I've been studying music since 1972, 1973. I'm not sure. Yeah. I remember being given a ukulele-sized guitar when I was really young, and starting music. And when I got into school, branched out to other instruments and studied classical, and then went to jazz, and then from jazz to fusion, and from fusion to funk, and then from funk to rock, and rock to punk. Punk went to industrial went to hardcore, and now it's almost white noise, just lots of screaming. Oh, wow. I've devolved. You devolved? Yes, I've gone the exact opposite direction as everyone else. So, I understand you also did a couple of stints where you worked as a musician for hire, like a gunslinger. You'd come in and play. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, years ago. I mean, I lived out of a tour bus for 2 years playing in bands. Yeah. So I was really before I turned into a Unix programmer, I was a musician. It's just a natural combo, I guess. How does that work out? I think it has something to do with the whole left brain, right brain imbalance. If you just completely imbalanced so far that you need a full-time babysitter, then you're a perfect fit for being either a Unix programmer or a musician. Possibly both. And it's funny because when I walk around Manhattan and all the different shops, you can almost always see where all the techies are, because you listen to the music that they're listening to, and it's not music that just normal people listen to. It's only music that musicians listen to. But yeah, I mean, now I'm pretty much doing session work here in the city. I'm involved in a band, but it's still in the very early stages, recording its first demo, and so I don't want to make any big announcements until something's ready to talk about. You're gonna have a Joomla website? Well, yeah, it's definitely not going to be a post-nuke site. You haven't got a name for this band yet? Well, yeah, that's up for debate. Okay, all right. And again, I want this one to stay under the radar until it's actually there's something to thump my chest about. you might be able to time a gig for the next Linux World.
Well, that would be interesting.
Yeah.
That would be interesting.
Okay, so moving along a bit, the Joomla split from Mambo, well, it was Open Source Matters initially, wasn't it? So tell us a bit about what that felt like.
Well, it was gut-wrenching for me. I'm sure everybody that you ask is going to have a different adjective, but for me it was gut-wrenching because it was clear that we were at a crossroads and a very, very difficult decision had to be made, and it was a decision that couldn't be rescinded. It was one of those one-way tickets, and in either direction, you're either going to the left or to the right, and whatever direction you choose, that's where you're headed. And we knew that there was going to be a lot of impact. There's going to be a lot of impact. A lot of people were going to feel the results of that decision, and that was something that we weren't really 100% in control of either, because it's one thing to say you're a core developer, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I can guarantee the community is going to always do what I want either. Just like, sometimes the community can't always guarantee that code what they want. So that goes both ways, and so it was a very frightening time. Of course, there were a lot of negative emotions. There was a lot of people, including myself, who felt misled and betrayed, and so there were some really strong emotions at that moment, and so it was difficult. I'm kind of proud of how we reacted, although a lot of people are frustrated with us because we didn't say a lot publicly. I'm hoping that people understand that was a bit of maturity stepping in, because we realized that mudslinging and making a very ugly public divorce really wouldn't serve anyone. Those situations are basically a no-win scenario for everyone. So at least by trying to take the high road, we made it possible for at least one of the parties to come out looking good. And ultimately, Miro and the Mambo camp had made their decisions on how they were going to react to the situation, and still honestly, yeah. I mean, and I guess the coolest part about all this is that I'd like to say that our reaction of being very, very tight-lipped about it made it possible for both parties to decide how they were going to react. Whereas if we would have come out swinging, it would have been just a battle. Whereas, Miro and Mambo had a choice. They could have been the same way if they wanted. And I kind of like to, whether they took that decision or not, I still think it's cool that we kind of put ourselves in a position that was available to them too, if that's how they wanted to react.
That sort of advice, was that supported by the fact that you got involved with Eben Moglen of the Software Freedom Law Center?
Mm-hmm.
Is that?
But that advice came from just about everybody I spoke to.
Yeah.
But Eben, the interesting thing about Eben was that I was, I learned about this whole thing happening while I was running the Mambo booth at Linux World in San Francisco. I was out there with Andy Miller as well, and I was sitting there on my laptop reading about a post in a forum, basically saying, Miro had gone ahead and put together the foundation, and they had reduced the seats of the core team from 2 to 1, and basically made some just arbitrary decisions on their own and didn't really, honor their original agreement, or at least how we see it. And so I'm just sitting there shaking my head thinking, now what? I was right about that time where I felt this horrible panic taking over me. Guess who comes up the escalator but Eben Moglen? So it's, difficult to keep myself from jumping up and throwing myself in his arms and giving him a big kiss. But he basically said, okay, look, I'll talk to you, because he lives here in the city as well. So it was very easy for him to just look at me and smile and wink and say, okay, I'll see you on Tuesday next week, and at my office. He says, now, I don't want you or anybody else to say a word about anything until then. And, for him, it perhaps was, well, I'm not going to talk for him, but I can say that from a legal perspective, that's a very smart strategy, because it means that he has more options available. If we had all basically freaked out and started screaming and yelling in the forums and accusing people publicly of doing this and that and the other thing, there's not a lot of flexibility in your response, right?
Yeah. But
I think ultimately what it did was it had a much more profound effect on us, because it forced us to sit down, shut up, and reevaluate. So, the decision that we made was definitely not taken lightly.
Yeah.
I mean, this was a very difficult decision to make, and we agonized over it. I know that I agonized over it personally, and I'm fairly safe in saying that I'm pretty sure that everybody else in the team agonized as well. I mean, this was the entire team. This wasn't just a handful of coders. It was all of the coders, all of the documentation teams, all of the translation teams, all of the moderators of the forums. It was the whole shebang, lock, stock, and barrel. And if this was just a knee-jerk reaction, then we would have never been able to have had that kind of consensus.
Well, it's not a fork then, is it, really? You've taken the whole project.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's why we say it was a rebranding. Because we're the people that, I mean, and there's been accusations out there of, well, yeah, not everybody who's been on the core team is involved in Joomla, and I can say with a lot of confidence that easily a vast, overwhelming majority of the people that had a major role to play in the current success that Mambo is enjoying were the ones that switched to Joomla.
Yeah.
A lot of people say, but, Andrew Eddy, he wasn't the project director back then. He was only project director for a year, and I'm thinking, yeah, but he wasn't, sitting in the womb right before that. He was busy writing the database class, which is one of the most important steps that that Mambo had ever taken forward. Having a real database class made it possible for Mambo to have a lot more functionality bolted in and have a lot more functionality added to the core without having a complete nightmare on your hands from a database management standpoint. So these are, 4.5.1 in my eyes is like the first Mambo release that was really ready for serious use.
And it was that period onwards when the accolades started to roll in, when the awards were being won.
Yeah, see, I don't remember Mambo 4.5.109 winning a bunch of awards, or 4.5.106 winning a bunch of awards. I mean, it was 4.5.1 was where the real traction started.
But I think it's probably more about community and participation than the winning of the awards, because without the community, you've got nothing, have you? Really?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think another thing is the North Americans basically discovered Mambo right at about that same time, and that was when a lot of interest. You can look at historically, you can look at the participation in the forums, and you can look at the type of traffic that the websites get. I mean, you look at the traffic that the Joomla websites get, right, and it's clearly slanted towards North America. I mean, right now that the North Americans have really embraced Joomla. They've really picked it up. Whereas, before it was traditionally an Australian and a European.
Very much so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd say now we've got. Well, the last batch of stats that I saw, it was a clear majority of traffic was coming from North America. But
you just have to stop clicking, Mitch.
Yeah, I got to quit hitting F5 on the front page.
Now, 1.1's on the horizon, which will be a significant release.
Oh, it's knocking on the door.
Yeah, and you were visiting a user group in Boston. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, the group is called Boston PHP. You can find them at bostonphp.org.
Yep. And
wow, it's a great group. I mean, they basically say that they're in the more or less in the early stages or embryonic stages of creating a user group. But we had 38, 40 people showed up, which is in my eyes a great size audience for a PHP user group. I mean, if you go to a keynote at an expo, then you would expect hundreds of people to show up. But when you're just showing up to do a talk for a user group, usually that's a lot of people. That's a lot.
I mean, I used to go to Apple user groups, and there might be 3 or 4 people turn up sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. But so it was. I would say that it was a great turnout, and a clear majority of the people that came there were seasoned veteran developers who were basically interested in what was going on in 1.1. There was a handful of people there that had basically never seen Joomla in action, and their approach was purely from a non-technical end-user perspective.
Yeah.
So I had the unenviable task of somehow talking to both groups without putting everyone to sleep, and that's easier said than done when one person asks a question like, so how do you change the logo for your website? And then the next question is, well, how did you deal with the uppercase, lowercase problems with certain databases not being fully ANSI SQL compliant? And so that range of extremes makes it difficult to talk for 2 hours and not put someone to sleep.
So, what sort of questions were coming from the group in terms of 1.1? Were they have concerns, or do they have ideas they'd like to share, or what came out of it?
Well, yeah, there was a lot of interest in what was going on in 1.1. I explained about some of the stuff that Johan and his team had done in the 1.1 development of refactoring Joomla.php, which was kind of like one of our biggest legacies, I guess, from the Mambo days, and a perfect example of bringing in the new guy, let the new guy take a look at an old problem that everyone else was just kind of taken for granted as that's just how it's done, and him saying, wait a minute, what the heck are we doing? And just taking a completely different approach. And, when he's done, we're all sitting there looking at it going, man, I wished I would have thought of that. And it was an absolutely brilliant idea. And, as I was telling you earlier, probably one of the biggest things is that not only did he rationalize the API so it's more logical for third-party developers to build apps because they now have a richer API to call different functions and features with, but on top of that, all this stuff has been broken out. So when Joomla's rendering a particular web page, it may not be loading all of these libraries because it may not need to. If you have a corporate website, for example, and you're just showing web pages to the general masses, you don't need to be firing up all of these other libraries to be, dealing with whether someone's authenticated or not and whether they have access to this object and blah-de-blah. You just want to show them the web page. So it's, the performance gains are going to be huge.
So, for a user experience, like somebody who just has a website, does that mean they'll get a page loading faster?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It also means the site will withstand loads. Much higher loads.
Okay, so instead of it just slowing down to a point where it won't deliver the data, it's more likely to stay alive, is it?
Well, instead of just spiraling down into the into the ground,
yeah,
it will actually stay up. It may slow down to the point to where people don't want to go there anymore, but it won't go down.
Okay.
I mean, you have to put a tremendous amount of load on these sites to go down. I mean, for example, we've had the Joomla.org website slashdotted a couple of times now. The first time we panicked and we put up static copies of the content just so that we could withstand the onslaught. But the other two times we were slashdotted, we were surprised and didn't know it was coming, and the site stayed up. I think the only time the site went down after that first slashdot when we panicked was when we said, here's the official first release of Joomla 1.0. And we said that it was going to be done at exactly,
that was the
12.
Countdown.
Yeah. And man, they pounded us into the cold hard earth, man. But because everybody's out there, refresh. So, and they did that to us with the new logo and that kind of stuff. But on the other hand, it's it takes a tremendous amount of traffic to bring one of these sites down, which is really cool.
It shows a lot of interest, though, doesn't it? Really.
We got a big enough community they can bring down our site on their own, I suppose.
So, for you, Mitch, where do you see the future? I mean, it's you got 1.1, and then beyond. We've sort of reading some of the features and multilingual support, and we see Johan posting about ACL.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else you can share with us that you think that piques your interest in what's going on?
Well, another vestige of Mambo that I'd love to see go the way of the dodo was this whole sections, categories, content items thing. I'd love to just have content thrown in folders, and folders could be nestable. So say you're just another common example, say you have a company website, you would have a folder called products, and inside of products you have a folder called software, and inside of that folder you got a folder called databases, and inside of that folder you've got Postgres, and Postgres is not a folder, it's a web page.
Yeah.
I'd love to see navigating your content of your website just like a file system or a hard drive.
So is this a wish list, or is this something that's on the horizon?
I think it's something that's we've conceptualized it, and in 4.5.3 back in the Mambo days we actually had running proof of concept code that was doing infinitely nested content. So it is absolutely attainable. It's not like it's not possible.
Because section category item for a lot of users is quite an obstacle to get past.
Yeah, it's one of the biggest barriers for people to understand how Joomla likes to manage content. Combine that with the fact that our navigation is completely decoupled from the content, and those are two really difficult concepts for people to come to grips with in the beginning.
All right, Mitch. Well, appreciate your time today and sharing some of the information that's going on. We might catch you again soon when you get back from another trip to Boston.
Okay. Thanks for having me.
Okay, mate. Thanks.
Ow, I just fell down the stairs.
Please hang up and try again.